In the House of Commons, the Liberals and Conservatives are sparring over which party is serious about building an oil pipeline. And tomorrow, the Conservatives say they'll introduce a motion for a pipeline with language that mirrors the Liberals' own memorandum of understanding with Alberta.
I'd invite the Leader of the Opposition not to cherry-pick parts of the MOU, but to support the entire MOU, which is what all of the Conservative premiers across this country are doing.
Mr. Speaker, this is the Prime Minister who said he wanted to keep half of our oil in the ground, and now he pretends to have changed his mind. He signed an MOU. He says one thing in BC, the opposite in Alberta, and here in the House of Commons, he hides under his desk.
So as they battle the Conservatives over this MOU, the government is also facing turmoil in the panel of experts that advise it on climate. The final two founding members of the Net Zero Advisory Body resigned last week, meaning it's lost more than half of its membership this year. Outgoing Chair Simon Donner said, "I was not comfortable with the process becoming neglected or performative, and it had begun to feel that way to me." Then, member Catherine Abreu specifically pointed to the Alberta MOU and new climate competitiveness strategy, saying, "At no point has the expert advice of Canada's legislative advisory body been sought or considered in these decisions. I cannot conscientiously continue in a government-appointed group whose function has been significantly curtailed so as to serve in name only." To discuss her resignation, Catherine Abreu joins me now. She's the director of the International Climate Politics Hub. Catherine, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, David.
Was there a specific thing in this deal between Ottawa and Alberta that led to your resignation, or was it the whole ball of wax that did it?
I mean, it was really the cumulative effect of several decisions that have been made over the course of the last number of months that have had significant implications for this country's approach to climate change. I'm talking about Bill C-5, where we saw extraordinary powers being given to Cabinet to approve projects even where they contravene Indigenous rights and title, the so-called climate competitiveness strategy in the budget, which I always put in air quotes because all that did for the climate was actually roll back existing policies without putting anything else in place. And finally, the MOU, which promises to build new fossil fuel infrastructure using taxpayer dollars, which will only expand the largest source of climate pollution in the country, which is already the least controlled source of pollution in the country. And, you know, I think probably the most egregious thing in there is that it extends subsidies for carbon capture and storage to enhanced oil recovery, i.e., just making the problem worse, which is the antithesis of what those public incentives are meant to achieve. So all of that combined meant that I could just no longer, in conscience, sit on this government-appointed body.
You and Stephen Guilbeault seem to view this very much the same way, because this mirrors a lot of the reasons why he decided to leave the cabinet, right? And Simon Donner, the former chair of the committee, said the work had become neglected or performative. How would you describe just where all of this is under the new direction of the federal Liberals?
Yeah, I hope that there's such a consistent message coming from some of Canada's top climate leaders that we do start to see a response from this government. We've been hearing a whole lot about what this government no longer wants to do on climate change without hearing very much about what they will do on climate change, other than promises of, you know, strengthening the industrial carbon price at some point in the spring, without any real details of what that will accomplish or the emissions reductions involved. And let's remember here that this is all legally mandated in Canada. We have a law. It's called the Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. And in that law, there is enshrined a number of principles, which includes a 2030 emissions reduction goal, a 2035 emissions reduction goal on the way to getting to net zero by 2050. And within that, a bunch of things are required, like the production of emissions reductions plans that really detail, okay, here's what each of these policies and regulations is going to contribute to these longer term goals. We're not seeing any of that come from this government. And I don't really have any confidence that they're going to produce it, although I really hope that the strong message that Prime Minister Carney and his government are hearing from the top climate experts in this country will give them a stronger mandate to come through and tell us what their plans are.
So clearly the divergence between the Prime Minister and former Environment Minister, former Culture Minister Stephen Guilbeault was, to really simplify it, Stephen Guilbeault believed in strong regulations and rules to force sort of an emissions reduction. The Prime Minister has talked about bringing people along and incentives as a way of getting towards reduction. When they got rid of the emissions cap, I talked to Dave Sawyer, who you know from the Climate Institute, about can strengthened industrial carbon pricing fill that gap? And at the time he said, yes, it has the potential. But now we've seen changes in Alberta in the wake of the MOU, which Sawyer and others say will not allow, will not deliver the effective changes that they were counting on. So 2030 targets seem impossible, 2035 seem unlikely. Can Canada hit 2050 if it keeps going in this direction?
No, there's no getting to net zero by 2050 if we don't meet our interim climate pollution reduction goals. And that's just the reality of it. We have to be real. I think it's also important for us to zoom out a little bit. It's easy for us in Canada to kind of get stuck in this bubble where the only point of comparison that we have is the United States, who of course have been walking back their own action on climate change under the Trump administration. So Canadians might think, oh, we're kind of in the same boat as everyone else. But in fact, Canada is doing worse on climate change than almost any other country out there, right? If we compare ourselves to our global peers in the G7, we've got the worst climate targets of any of them. We're the only G7 country whose emissions have gone up since early 1990s, and we've made the least progress in separating our production, our gross domestic product, and our prosperity from climate pollution. So we've got a whole lot of work to do in this country when compared to the rest of the world. And I think that that's also significant for our economy. A lot of the conversation has been wrapped up in like climate change is too expensive for us to do anything about. But in fact, it's too expensive for us to leave it so neglected and for us to continue underinvesting in the green economy that many of our global peers have been building their market share in for the last decades while Canada falls behind.
I guess one of the challenges Canada faces compared to the other G7 countries is the deep intertwinement with the United States, the economic dependency and the overexposure there, which has proved to be a hard lesson to learn since Donald Trump returned to the White House. So does that limit the ability of the country to take the collective action on climate because of the direct competitiveness challenges it creates economically? Because you're seeing polling now, a lot of Canadians, are 58%, I believe, are behind an oil pipeline to diversify from the United States, and that moves to the front of the priority list in the short term.
It's easy to say that you're behind an oil pipeline when that's the only choice that you're given for a project that will increase Canadian prosperity. And that's consistently been the case for the last 2 decades since I was in high school that I've been working on climate change. The only choice that Canadians are given when we have to turn our economy up is to build more fossil fuel infrastructure. We've tried that before. It didn't work. 8 years ago, when the government bought a pipeline, instead we're pouring billions in public taxpayer dollars into subsidies for that pipeline that isn't even currently operating at full capacity. So I don't buy the pipeline story at this point. Do I understand that, yes, there are particular challenges that Canada faces, given our proximity to the United States and our intertwinement with that major trading partner, of course. However, we also make a point, I think Canadians make a point of pointing out that that trading relationship is not just with the national entity that is the United States, it's with American states. And many of those states are continuing to drive forward with climate action. Many of those states are actually continuing with the investments that were made under the previous administration in the United States in the Inflation Reduction Act to build new clean energy. And so despite the kind of difference in attitude from the United States, and yes, the pressure that's being applied on Canada and other countries from the tariffs, I think we can take heart from our other global trading partners, as well as from the American states themselves that are some of our major trading partners, to say, we're all still going forward in this direction of travel. Let's figure out how Canada can have success in the global green economy instead of taking our economy backward yet again.
Yeah, California, if it was a country, would be a member of the G7 based on the size of its economy, and it has some of the strictest regulations and policy out there. Catherine Abreu, Director of International Climate Politics Hub, thank you for your time. It's always good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.